On a recent Coach Robb podcast, I mentioned that our body is inherently lazy, and I had quite a few DMs that had come in and asked if I would elaborate on that, and more importantly, wanted clarification. Was I accusing you of being lazy? Let's take a look. On the Coach Robb podcast, when I was referencing the body tends to be lazy, what I mean, not just for myself, but what we say in the physiological world, is that the body will always take the path of least resistance. So if I use something such as running as an example, the body does not want to stay in what we refer to as an optimized biomechanical running position. That would be the head over the knees landing, or rather the knees right over the landing foot, dead center. We call that falling forward position. If you look at the elite runners, they're falling forward at all times. They're landing on the midfoot predominantly, and you'll notice that their recovery foot, the one that's coming up when it leaves the ground, you'll notice that the typical foot will come all the way up to the crease of the back of their knee. If you're able to get access to the Garmin data and you look at the run cadence, the best athletes in the world run above 180 on, when I say the best. 99% of the best athletes, best runners in the world, you'll find their run cadence is going to be above that 180. As always, there's an exception to every number that we put out there statistically. When we come back to the idea of the path of least resistance, this is what we say, especially in the physiological world, is a train wreck for biomechanic efficiency. If you're riding motorcycles, you know that you ideally should have your elbows up, but it's a lot easier to ride with your elbows down, even though that's going to allow the bars to be able to snap. We looked at something like running. If you're falling forward, it doesn't take a lot of extra effort, but it does take a lot of extra strength and flexibility. You go, wait, what's the difference? Well, first of all, you've got to train yourself to understand the benefit of it. You have to train yourself with the appropriate sport-specific strength, and you have to have sport-specific let me rephrase that. You have to have functional movement specific to your sport. So a runner has to have good quadricep flexibility, hamstring flexibility. They actually have to have good flexibility in the front of their shins to pick the toes up. You have to have good flexibility in the back of the legs, the calves and gastrocs and the soleus. The soleus is below the gastrocs. Gastrocs and soleus are the same thing. I'm saying that incorrectly, I apologize. The gastrocs in your calf muscles are the same. Soleus runs underneath that. My point in bringing all of this up is when your body starts to fatigue and break down, this is where you'll start to biomechanically, like in the running environment, your shoulders will come back. And when your shoulders come back, your hips will tuck underneath you, and the next thing you know, you're landing on your heels. So instead of being efficient and bouncing, a very simple illustration that I like to use is if I took a tennis ball and a golf ball and I dropped them from the same height, the golf ball will always bounce higher because it loses less energy when it hits the ground because of the harder surface. When you're running, your midfoot is like a golf ball. It'll tap and go, but if you land with your heel, it compresses and then it has to go back up. Well, think about this. If you become tired, your head shifts backwards, shoulders fall back, hips tuck underneath you, now you're landing on your heels predominantly. This is where we get the idea that when you fall apart biomechanically, you start to slow down exponentially. And why would that happen? Well, the body is going to take the path of least resistance whenever possible. So this is why strength training and flexibility, functional strength flexibility, is so absolutely imperative, and they have to be developed on par with one another. You'll hear me say over and over again, strength without flexibility is useless. Flexibility without strength is useless. But when I say the body will take the path of least resistance, that's where my joke is that the body is lazy. It doesn't want to do the extra work. And that's why you have to train it both at a neuromuscular level, up here in your brain, teaching yourself, hey, when you start to fatigue, what can I do specific to my sport to remind myself to be more biomechanically efficient? When you increase the biomechanic efficiency, you're going to have better top end speed. You'll have great late race endurance. You'll actually have a lower overall heart rate for that activity because you have less self-induced resistance. A tight muscle will wear you out much quicker than a very flexible muscle. A strong muscle will allow you to maintain your ideal speed for a much longer period of time. That's where we get the word muscular endurance. So I wasn't calling anybody lazy on the Coach Robb podcast, but as human beings, we unfortunately have to fight this inherent nature of our body wanting to take the path of least resistance, which creates athletic, biomechanic atrocities. And it makes it much more difficult for us to be able to go fast and be able to sustain it for any period of time. I love these questions. I'm glad that you guys are supporting the Coach Robb podcast. I deeply appreciate it. We always say that the Coach Robb podcast is the people's podcast. So should you have any questions about what we talked about here in this video today, please do me a favor and send me an email. contact@coachrobb.com. If you haven't subscribed, I would deeply appreciate it. It helps get the algorithms up here on YouTube. And make sure you turn on the notifications. If you're kind enough to subscribe, I want to make sure that you're one of the first to get notification of a video of which we drop every day here on YouTube. So thanks for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.